The evening was soft, almost tender, as the last light of an April sunset bled into the quiet streets of Arlington, Virginia. The air carried the sweet tang of blooming cherry blossoms, mingling with the faint hum of suburban life lawnmowers winding down, kids' laughter fading into backyards. Inside a gleaming black Audi Q5, Evelyn Harper, 38, sat in the passenger seat, her fingers brushing the edge of her silk scarf, a nervous tic she'd never quite shaken from her days in Spectre 7, a clandestine Delta Force unit that had shaped her into something both unbreakable and haunted. Beside her, Marcus Harper, 41, drove with a calm confidence, his hands steady on the wheel, his deep voice weaving a story about their son Jamal's triumphant saxophone performance at the high school spring recital. "Boy was sweating bullets," Marcus said, a grin lighting his face, "but he played like he was born with that sax in his hands." Evelyn let out a low chuckle, her eyes softening for a moment, but her posture remained alert, her spine straight as if braced for an ambush. The dashboard clock glowed 9:32 p.m., its green digits a quiet anchor in the dim cabin. They were only minutes from home, a two-story colonial on a tree-lined street, where they'd planned to unwind with a glass of Merlot and maybe tease Jamal about his stage fright. But Evelyn's instincts, sharpened by years in war zones, prickled at the edges of her awareness. She shifted slightly, her gaze flicking to the side mirror, scanning for threats she couldn't name but always felt. "You're doing it again," Marcus said, his voice warm but teasing, his eyes catching hers in the rearview mirror. "That soldier stare. We're in Arlington, EV, not Kabul." She tilted her head, offering a faint smile, but didn't relax. "Old habits," she murmured, her fingers tightening briefly on the scarf before loosening again. Marcus reached over, his hand grazing hers, his touch a reminder of the life they'd carved out together, a life of PTA meetings, jazz recitals, and quiet evenings, a life that was supposed to be safe. They'd just turned onto Clarendon Boulevard, the streetlights casting long, lazy shadows across the pavement, when a sudden flash of red and blue erupted behind them. The patrol car's lights were harsh, relentless, cutting through the night like a warning shot. Marcus's smile faded, his jaw tightening as he eased the Audi to the curb, his movements precise, practiced. "Not again," he muttered, his voice low, carrying the weight of every unwarranted stop they'd endured over the years. Evelyn's breath slowed, her body shifting into a state of hyper-awareness, her eyes locked on the side mirror as two figures emerged from the patrol car. Officer Derek Vance, 34, led the approach, his stride cocky, his hand resting near his holster with a casual arrogance that set Evelyn's teeth on edge. Behind him, Officer Caleb Ruiz, 29, moved more cautiously, his shoulders hunched slightly, as if the badge on his chest was still an unfamiliar weight. Vance tapped the driver's window with a knuckle, the sound sharp, like a gavel calling order. Marcus rolled it down, his hands visible on the wheel, his face composed but wary. "Evening," Vance said, his voice flat, almost lazy, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the interior of the Audi with a predator's focus. They lingered on Marcus's tailored blazer, the car's leather seats, Evelyn's understated but expensive scarf. "License and registration," he said, his tone clipped, authoritative. Marcus nodded, his voice steady. "Yes, sir. It's in the glove box." He moved slowly, deliberately, reaching for the compartment, his every gesture telegraphed to avoid misunderstanding. Vance's lips curled into a smirk. "Nice ride," he said, his voice heavy with insinuation. "What's a couple like you doing out here? Band practice pay for this?" The question wasn't curious, it was a taunt, laced with a familiar disdain that made Evelyn's stomach twist. Marcus kept his tone even, professional, as he handed over the documents. "Just heading home from our son's recital, officer," he said, his smile polite but tight, a shield against the jab. Vance's gaze shifted to Evelyn, his eyes narrowing as they took her in her composed posture, her steady hands, the way she met his stare without flinching. "You're quiet," he said, leaning closer, his breath fogging the window. "Something to hide?" His tone was mocking, probing, as if her silence was a puzzle he intended to crack. Evelyn didn't respond, her face a mask of calm, but her eyes were steel, a silent warning that she wasn't the one who should be afraid. She'd faced men like Vance before in dusty outposts in shadowed alleys, men who thought power came from a gun or a badge. She'd outlasted them all. "Answer me," Vance snapped, his voice rising, a crack in his facade of control. Caleb stepped closer, his voice tentative. "Derek, they're cooperating. Let's keep this smooth." Vance shot him a look, his lip curling. "Don't tell me how to do my job, rookie." His attention snapped back to Evelyn. "I don't like quiet types. Makes me think you're planning something." Marcus's voice cut through, calm but firm. Officer, here's the paperwork. We're just trying to get home. He held up the documents, his hand steady, but Vance's eyes flicked to his movement, his hand tightening on his holster. Keep your hands where I can see them, he barked, his voice sharp, etched with something that wasn't just authority but fear. Evelyn's pulse quickened, her mind racing through scenarios, each one a variation on a theme she'd lived too many times: control slipping, violence rising, blood inevitable. He's complying, Evelyn said, her voice low, measured, but carrying the weight of a command. Vance's head whipped toward her, his eyes blazing. You don't talk unless I ask you to, he said, his finger twitching near the trigger. Caleb's voice rose, urgent. Derek, ease up, but it was too late. Marcus, still holding the documents, reached slowly for his wallet, his movements deliberate, his voice calm. I'm just getting my ID, officer. Don't move, Vance shouted, his gun clearing its holster in a blur. The air froze, the moment suspended like a held breath. Caleb's hand shot out as if to stop him, but the shot exploded, a deafening crack that shattered the night. The bullet tore through Marcus's chest, blood spraying across the dashboard, soaking his blazer in a dark spreading stain. His body jerked, his hand slipping from the wheel, his head lolling forward. Evelyn moved before the echo faded, her door flung open, her body a blur as she rounded the car. She caught Marcus as he slumped, her arm strong, steady, pulling him from the seat to the pavement. Blood poured from the wound, hot and relentless, coating her hands, her blouse, her scarf. Marcus, she said, her voice fierce, unyielding. Stay with me. You hear me? Stay. His eyes, wide and glassy, found hers, his lips parting as if to speak, but only a faint, wet rasp escaped. His hand reached for her, trembling, then fell limp against her thigh. Vance stumbled back, his gun still raised, his face pale but defiant. He reached, he shouted, his voice cracking as if convincing himself as much as anyone else. I thought he had a weapon. Evelyn's gaze snapped to him, her eyes burning with a fury so cold it seemed to suck the warmth from the air. You saw a wallet, she said, her voice low, each word a verdict. You saw a man, my husband, and you killed him because you're weak. Caleb stood frozen, his radio clutched in a white-knuckled grip, his face ashen under the streetlight's glare. Derek, he stammered, his voice barely audible. He wasn't, but Vance ignored him, his eyes locked on Evelyn, his gun still pointed at her, as if her refusal to break was a threat he couldn't name. She's trouble, he muttered, loud enough for Caleb to hear. They both are. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder, a chorus of chaos closing in. Evelyn knelt beside Marcus, her hands pressed against the wound, blood seeping through her fingers, pooling on the asphalt. I've got you, love, she whispered, her voice a lifeline, fierce and unwavering. Marcus's chest rose once, a shallow, stuttering breath, then stilled. His eyes, still locked on hers, dimmed, the light fading like a candle snuffed out. She placed his hand gently on his chest, her own heart hardening into something sharp, something unstoppable. The first backup car screeched to a halt, officers spilling out, their radios crackling with urgency. Vance lowered his gun, his posture shifting to one of authority, his voice loud, rehearsed. Suspect reached for an unknown object. I acted in self-defense. Caleb's eyes darted to Evelyn, then to the ground, his silence heavy, his guilt a shadow that clung to him. Evelyn didn't move, her hand still on Marcus, her eyes tracing his face, the strong jaw, the faint scar above his eyebrow, the man who'd been her anchor through a decade of peace. Neighbors gathered at the edges of the scene, their voices a low hum of shock and outrage. A woman in a cardigan clutched her phone, whispering to her husband, "That's Marcus Harper. He coaches Little League." A teenager across the street filmed with trembling hands, his voice cracking as he narrated, "They just shot him. He wasn't doing anything." Evelyn heard it all, but her focus remained on Marcus, on the blood that no longer flowed, on the life that had slipped through her fingers. Paramedics arrived, their movements swift but futile, their faces grim as they knelt beside Marcus. A young medic, her braid swinging as she worked, touched Evelyn's shoulder. "Ma'am, we need space to do our job." Evelyn didn't respond at first, her hands still pressed against Marcus's chest, as if her will could pull him back. The medic's voice softened. "Please, ma'am." Evelyn looked up, her eyes not pleading but commanding, a soldier's gaze in a civilian's body. "Do it right," she said, her voice low, raw with grief and resolve. She stood, stepping back as the medics worked, their hands a blur of bandages and monitors. Blood clung to her blouse, drying into a stiff, dark crust, staining her scarf, her hands, her resolve. She didn't wipe it away, didn't flinch. She stood like a monument, her gaze shifting from Marcus to Vance, who was now speaking to another officer, gesturing animatedly, his story taking shape like a script he'd rehearsed 1,000 times. Caleb lingered at the edge, his hands clasped behind his back, his face pale, his eyes avoiding hers. The crowd grew, their phones raised, their voices rising in a chorus of disbelief. A man in a baseball cap shouted, "This ain't right." A woman with a toddler on her hip wept, her voice breaking as she said, "He was one of us." Evelyn's silence was louder, a force that seemed to pull the night into her orbit. She didn't cry, didn't collapse. She stood, her hands clenched, the blood on her knuckles cracking as her fists tightened. The lead paramedic, a grizzled man with tired eyes, stood and faced Evelyn. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice quiet, heavy with the weight of too many nights like this. "He's gone." Evelyn nodded once, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with a purpose that hadn't existed an hour ago. The crowd's murmurs grew louder, their anger a living thing, but Evelyn's stillness was a blade cutting through the noise. Vance approached, his swagger diminished but not gone, his voice carrying a forced calm. "Ma'am, you need to come with us to the station. Answer some questions." Evelyn turned to him, her gaze so steady it made him falter. "You don't get to call me ma'am," she said, her voice low, cutting like a scalpel. "Not after you took everything." Vance's jaw clenched, but he didn't respond. Caleb looked away, his guilt a weight he couldn't shake. An officer guided Evelyn to a patrol car, his touch light, almost hesitant. She glanced back at the Audi, at Marcus's body now covered with a sheet, at the blood pooling on the pavement, a dark mirror reflecting the streetlights. The sight seared into her memory, not as a wound but as a map she would follow to justice, to reckoning, to whatever lay beyond. The car door closed with a soft thud, and she sat in the back seat, her blood-stained hands resting on her lap, her scarf still clinging to her shoulders, a relic of a life that had ended with a single shot. At the precinct, the air was stale, thick with the smell of burnt coffee and old paper. Evelyn sat in a metal chair, her blouse stiff with dried blood, her scarf a crimson-streaked banner of loss. Detective Alan Kessler, 52, entered, his face a mask of practiced detachment, a file tucked under his arm like a weapon. He sat across from her, flipping it open with a slow, deliberate motion, as if the act could rattle her. So he began, his voice heavy with condescension, "You're the widow. Most people would be falling apart. You? Not a tear. Makes me wonder." Evelyn's eyes met his, unyielding, her voice calm but sharp. "You think grief looks like weakness. That's your mistake." Kessler's smirk faltered, but he leaned forward, undeterred. "Body cam shows your husband made a sudden move. Glitch cut the footage during the shot. Convenient, right?" "Convenient for who?" Evelyn countered, her gaze piercing, a blade honed by years of facing down liars. Kessler's smile tightened, his fingers tapping the file. "You're playing the strong widow card. Media loves that. But you don't look like someone who just lost her husband." "I'm not performing for you," she said, each word deliberate, a stone dropped into still water. "I'm remembering." Kessler stood, tossing the file onto the table with a thud. "We'll see how long you keep that up," he said, turning to leave. "Most people break eventually." The door clicked shut, leaving Evelyn alone in the fluorescent-lit room. She didn't pace, didn't fidget, didn't touch the plastic water bottle they'd left as a prop. She sat, her eyes fixed on the table's scratched surface, her mind replaying the night frame by frame, Vance's twitchy fingers, Caleb's hesitation, Marcus's last breath. She wasn't just grieving. She was building something, a plan forged in blood and silence, a reckoning that would shake the foundations of this quiet suburb. Outside, the precinct hummed with activity, officers whispering about the incident on Clarendon Boulevard. Vance leaned against a wall, his voice loud, boastful as he recounted the stop to a colleague. "She didn't even flinch," he said, his chuckle dark, forced. "Like a damn statue. That's the kind who snaps." Caleb, standing nearby, didn't laugh. His coffee cup trembled in his hand, his silence no longer neutral but heavy, a confession he wasn't ready to voice. Evelyn didn't know their words, but she didn't need to. She knew men like Vance, knew the system that shielded them, knew the power of silence and how to wield it like a weapon. She closed her eyes, not to rest but to strategize, to map the path ahead. The blood on her hands had dried, a permanent mark, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she would fight for. This wasn't the end, it was the spark that would set everything ablaze. The Arlington Police Precinct was a fortress of fluorescent lights and stale coffee, its walls steeped in the kind of institutional arrogance that Evelyn Harper, 38, had faced in war zones and boardrooms alike. She sat in an interrogation room, the metal chair cold against her back, her blood-stained blouse a grim reminder of the night that had shattered her world. Marcus Harper, her husband of 12 years, was gone, killed by a single shot from Officer Derek Vance's gun on Clarendon Boulevard. The blood on her hands had dried into a cracked, rust-colored map, but Evelyn's eyes were clear, her mind a steel trap cataloging every detail of the hours since the shot rang out. It was 2:17 a.m., and Detective Alan Kessler, 52, had left her alone in the room, his parting smirk a promise that silence wouldn't save her. But silence was Evelyn's weapon, honed in the deserts of Syria and the jungles of Colombia as a member of Spectre 7, a covert Delta Force unit whose name was whispered only in classified briefings. She didn't pace, didn't fidget, didn't touch the plastic water bottle sweating on the table. She sat, her hands folded, her gaze fixed on a scratch in the metal surface, her thoughts racing like a chess master plotting 10 moves ahead. The door creaked open and Kessler returned, his tie loosened, a manila folder thicker now with hastily printed reports. He tossed it onto the table, the thud echoing in the sterile room. "You're a cool customer, Mrs. Harper," he said, his voice heavy with mock admiration. "Most widows would be screaming, crying, begging for answers. You? Nothing. Makes me think you're used to this kind of thing." Evelyn's eyes lifted, meeting his with a steadiness that made him shift in his seat. "You think grief is loud," she said, her voice low, deliberate, each word a stone dropped into still water. "That's because you've never seen it forged in fire." Kessler's smirk faltered, but he leaned forward, undeterred. "Body cam footage shows your husband made a sudden move. Technical glitch cut out the moment of the shot. Bad luck for you, huh?" "Bad luck for who?" she countered, her gaze piercing, a blade honed by years of reading lies in the faces of enemies. Kessler's fingers twitched, tapping the folder. "You're playing a dangerous game. Acting like you're above this. You think you can lawyer up, spin a story for the media? We've got witnesses, reports, procedure on our side." Evelyn leaned forward, just an inch, but the shift in her posture seemed to shrink the room. "You have a man's blood on your hands," she said, her voice soft but cutting. "Procedure didn't pull that trigger. Derek Vance did." Kessler's jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't respond. He stood, gathering the folder. "You'll sit here until you're ready to cooperate," he said, turning to leave. "We've got all night." The door slammed shut, and Evelyn exhaled, her breath steady but her mind racing. She wasn't here to break, she was here to build, to gather the fragments of this night and forge them into something unstoppable. She closed her eyes, not to rest but to replay every moment. Vance's twitchy fingers, Caleb Ruiz's hesitation, the crowd's murmurs, the teenager filming across the street. Somewhere in that chaos was the truth, and she would find it, no matter how deep it was buried. Underscore 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 underscore. For hours later, they released her, not out of mercy but because they had nothing to hold her on. The sky was gray, dawn creeping over Arlington's quiet streets as Evelyn stepped out of the precinct, her scarf still stained, her purse clutched tightly. A young officer, barely out of the academy, offered to drive her home, his eyes avoiding hers. She declined, her voice firm. "I'll walk." It was a mile to her colonial on Oak Street, and she needed the time to think, to let the cold morning air sharpen her resolve. The neighborhood was waking, joggers and dog walkers casting curious glances at the woman in the blood-stained blouse, her face unreadable but her presence commanding. She passed a corner store where Marcus used to buy Jamal's favorite sour candies, and the sight of the neon sign stabbed at her chest, but she didn't falter. Grief was a luxury she couldn't afford, not yet. She reached her house, the porch light still on, a futile beacon for a man who'd never return. Inside, the silence was deafening, the living room a museum of their life. Marcus's jazz records, Jamal's saxophone case, a photo of their wedding day on the mantel. Jamal was at his aunt's, spared the sight of his father's blood but not the weight of his absence. Evelyn sank into a chair at the kitchen table, her hands trembling for the first time since the shot. She allowed herself one moment, one breath to feel the void Marcus had left, the man who'd laughed at her terrible cooking, who'd held her through nightmares of war, who'd believed in her when she doubted herself. Then she stood, her jaw set, and moved to her study. The room was her sanctuary, lined with books on military strategy and law, a locked cabinet holding relics of her past. She opened a hidden drawer, retrieving a USB drive wrapped in black electrical tape, marked with 3 faint scratches, a code from her Spectre days. She plugged it into her laptop, her fingers steady as she opened a secure folder labeled Contingency. Inside was a file dated 2 months ago, a grainy video from a civilian camera across from their local bank. It wasn't much, just a test run of a surveillance hack she'd set up years ago, a paranoid habit from her military life, but it proved she could access private feeds. Evelyn's mind flashed to the teenager filming the shooting, his phone raised across Clarendon Boulevard. If a civilian camera had caught the incident, others might have too. She opened a dark web browser, her fingers flying across the keyboard as she accessed a network of grey hat hackers she'd once consulted during a classified op in Yemen. She posted a single message: "Need footage, Arlington, Virginia, Clarendon Boulevard, April 23, 25, 9:30 p.m. Discreet. Name your price." She didn't expect a response soon, but she knew the bait was set. Next, she turned to her phone, scrolling through contacts until she found Lila Monroe, 45, a former JAG Corps attorney who'd served with Evelyn in Iraq. Lila answered on the second ring, her voice groggy but sharp. "Evie? It's 5 in the morning. What's wrong?" Evelyn's voice was steady, but the words carried a weight that silenced Lila's yawn. "Marcus is dead. Police shooting. I need you." Lila arrived an hour later, her hair pulled back, her briefcase stuffed with legal pads and a laptop. She hugged Evelyn, her grip fierce but didn't linger on pleasantries. "Tell me everything," she said, sitting at the kitchen table, her pen poised. Evelyn recounted the night, her voice clinical, every detail precise. Vance's taunts, Caleb's hesitation, Kessler's interrogation. Lila's face darkened, her notes filling pages. "They're circling the wagons," she said, her voice tight. "Glitch in the body cam? That's their playbook. We need evidence they can't bury." Evelyn nodded, her eyes flicking to the laptop. "I'm working on it." Lila raised an eyebrow but didn't press. She knew Evelyn's past, knew the kind of woman who could survive a firefight in Helmand and walk away with scars instead of surrender. "You're not alone in this," Lila said, her voice firm. "But you need to stay sharp, not vengeful. The system's rigged, but we can fight it. Underscore 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 underscore. By noon, Evelyn had showered, the blood washed from her skin but not her memory. She wore a black blazer and jeans, her buzz cut stark under the kitchen light. Her first stop was the Arlington County Courthouse, where she requested public records on Vance and Ruiz disciplinary files, incident reports, anything that might show a pattern. The clerk, a tired woman in her 50s, sighed. "That'll take weeks, ma'am. Freedom of Information Act requests are backed up." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "Then expedite it," she said, sliding a 20 across the counter, her voice low but firm. The clerk hesitated, then pocketed the bill, muttering about priority processing. Next, she drove to Clarendon Boulevard, the Audi now impounded, replaced by Marcus's old pickup truck, its dashboard cluttered with Jamal's candy wrappers. The crime scene was cordoned off, yellow tape fluttering in the breeze, but the blood stain on the pavement was still there, a dark accusation no one had bothered to clean. Evelyn parked across the street, her eyes scanning the storefronts: a coffee shop, a dry cleaner, a vape store with a flickering neon sign. She spotted a security camera above the coffee shop's entrance, its lens pointed toward the intersection. She entered the shop, the bell jingling as she stepped into the smell of roasted beans and pastries. A barista, a college kid with a nose ring, looked up. "What can I get you?" Evelyn didn't smile. "Your manager." "Now." The barista hesitated, then called for Tina Reyes, 39, a no-nonsense woman with a clipboard and a tired smile. Evelyn explained, her voice low, urgent. "I need your security footage from last night, 9:30 p.m. My husband was killed out there." Tina's face softened, but her voice was cautious. "I heard about it. I'm so sorry. But the police already asked for the footage. They took the hard drive." Evelyn's jaw tightened, but she didn't falter. "Did you back it up? Cloud storage? Anything?" Tina hesitated, then leaned closer. "Off the record? We've got a secondary feed streams to my boss's server. But if I give it to you, I could lose my job." Evelyn pulled a business card from her purse, blank except for a burner phone number written in her precise handwriting. "You won't lose anything," she said, her voice low, commanding. "But if you help me, you'll sleep better knowing you did the right thing." Tina took the card, her fingers trembling slightly, and nodded. "Give me a day," she whispered. Underscore 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 underscore. That night, Evelyn sat in her study, the USB drive now joined by a notebook filled with her meticulous handwriting timelines, names, questions. Her hacker contact responded, a user named Ghostkey, offering a grainy clip from a traffic cam 2 blocks away. It wasn't perfect, but it showed the Audi pulling over, Vance's aggressive posture, Marcus's hands on the wheel. The shot itself was out of frame, but the clip captured Caleb's hesitation, his hand reaching toward Vance as if to stop him. Evelyn paid $500 in cryptocurrency, her fingers steady as she downloaded the file to her encrypted server. She cross-referenced the footage with her memory, noting discrepancies in Vance's report, which she glimpsed during Kessler's interrogation. Vance claimed Marcus had lunged for something, but the traffic cam showed no such movement. She wrote in her notebook, Vance lies. Caleb knows. Leverage Caleb. She tore out the page, folded it, and slipped it into her jacket, a ritual that grounded her, a soldier's way of marking the battlefield. The next morning, Lila called with news. A contact at the DA's office had leaked that Vance had 3 prior complaints for excessive force, all dismissed. He's a liability, Lila said, her voice grim. But the department's protecting him. We need more than complaints, we need a smoking gun. Evelyn's mind flashed to the coffee shop footage. I'm close, she said, her voice steady. Stay ready. Evelyn's next move was riskier. She drove to Fort Myer, a military base just outside Arlington, where she'd once trained with Spectre 7. She parked near the gate, her pickup blending with the civilian vehicles, and called Colonel James Tate, 47, a former commander who'd overseen her unit's ops in Syria. Tate met her in a nondescript office, his face weathered but his eyes sharp, a man who knew the cost of secrets. Evelyn, he said, his voice low, cautious. You're invoking Spectre. That's a door you can't close. She slid an envelope across the desk, containing a USB with the traffic cam footage and a handwritten note. Hellman, 2016. You know what I did? I need clearance to know what they're hiding. Tate's jaw tightened, his fingers tracing the envelope. You're asking me to stick my neck out, he said. Vance's uncle is a county commissioner. This isn't just a Kapitsa system. Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. I'm not asking, she said, her voice soft but ironclad. I'm telling you. Marcus deserved better, and I'm not stopping until the truth is loud enough to wake the city. Tate exhaled, then nodded. I'll make calls. But if this blows back, you're on your own. Evelyn stood, her hand on the door. I've always been on my own. Underscore 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 underscore. Tina called that evening, her voice hushed. I've got the footage. Meet me at the park on 10th Street, 9 p.m. Evelyn arrived early, her pickup parked a block away, her eyes scanning the shadows. Tina appeared, a USB drive clutched in her hand, her face pale. This is it, she said, handing it over. But if they find out, I'm done. Evelyn took the drive, her voice calm but firm. They won't. You're braver than you know. Tina nodded, then vanished into the night. Back home, Evelyn plugged the drive into her laptop, her heart pounding as the footage loaded. It was crystal clear. The Audi, Vance's taunts, Marcus's careful reach, the shot. Caleb's face was visible, his eyes wide, his hand reaching toward Vance a split second too late. The footage ended with Evelyn cradling Marcus, her face a mask of fury and grief. She saved the file, encrypted it, and uploaded it to servers in Iceland and Singapore, her fingers trembling not with fear but with purpose. She called Lila, her voice urgent. I've got it. Civilian footage, unedited. Vance can't lie his way out of this. Lila's breath caught. Send it to me. We'll build the case, but we need to move fast. They're already spinning this as a tragic misunderstanding. Evelyn's jaw tightened. Let them spin. I'm not here to negotiate with lies. Underscore 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 underscore. The next day, Evelyn visited the precinct unannounced, her blazer crisp, her buzz cut stark under the fluorescent lights. She demanded to see Caleb Ruiz, her voice carrying the authority of a soldier accustomed to being obeyed. The desk sergeant hesitated, then called Caleb, who appeared in the lobby, his face pale, his hands fidgeting. Mrs. Harper, he stammered, his eyes avoiding hers. I am sorry for your loss. Evelyn stepped closer, her voice low-cutting. "Don't apologize to me," she said. "Apologize to my son, who'll grow up without a father because you stood by and did nothing." Caleb flinched, his eyes darting to the floor. "It happened so fast," he whispered. "I didn't know he'd shoot." Evelyn's gaze didn't waver. "You knew he was wrong. You still know." "I have footage, Caleb. You're in it, and you're not the hero." Caleb's face drained of color, his hands trembling. "What do you want from me?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Evelyn leaned closer, her voice a whisper. "The truth. Not for me, for Marcus. You decide which side of this you're on." She turned and left, her boots echoing in the lobby, leaving Caleb staring after her, his world unraveling. That night, Evelyn stood in her backyard, a glass of bourbon in her hand, the stars above Arlington a cold, distant audience. She thought of Marcus, of his laugh, his steady hand, his belief in her. She thought of Jamal, sleeping at his aunt's, unaware of the war his mother was waging. She thought of Spectre 7, of the scars on her spine, the lives she'd saved, the lives she'd taken. She wasn't just a widow, she was a weapon forged in fire, tempered by loss. Her phone buzzed, a message from Tate. "Vance's file is clean, but his uncle's pulling strings. Watch your back." Evelyn deleted the message, her jaw set. She didn't need warning, she needed results. She returned to her study, opening a new file labeled Reckoning. She wrote, "The truth is a blade." Willed it without mercy. She tore out the page, folded it, and slipped it into her jacket, a soldier preparing for battle. The media had begun to circle, local news vans parked outside her house, reporters shouting questions she ignored. A hashtag, Justice for Marcus, trended on X, fueled by the teenager's live stream. Evelyn didn't engage, she wasn't here for sympathy or spectacle. She was here for justice, and she would carve it out of this city's silence, one truth at a time. The Arlington County Courthouse stood like a monolith under a slate-gray sky, its brick facade unmoved by the chaos swirling around it. On the morning of the trial, media vans choked the streets, their satellite dishes jetting like spears into the October air. Reporters jostled for position, their cameras trained on the courthouse steps, where a crowd of protesters waved signs scrawled with "Justice for Marcus" and "In the Blue Wall." Evelyn Harper, 38, stepped out of a black sedan, her tailored navy suit crisp, her buzz-cut scalp stark against the autumn chill. She carried no purse, only a slim leather folder, her hands steady despite the weight of the moment. The crowd parted for her, their chants softening to murmurs, as if her presence alone demanded reverence. Evelyn's boots clicked on the marble steps, each step a declaration of intent. She wasn't here to mourn publicly or play the grieving widow for the cameras, she was here to dismantle a lie, to carve truth from a system that thrived on silence. Inside, the courtroom was a pressure cooker, the air thick with anticipation. Spectators filled the pews, their whispers a low hum, while reporters scribbled notes, their pens scratching like insects. At the defense table sat Officer Derek Vance, 34, his face pale but defiant, his eyes flicking nervously to the gallery. Beside him, his attorney Richard Holt, 45, adjusted his tie, his confidence a practice mask. Officer Caleb Ruiz, 29, sat 2 rows back, his hands clasped tightly, his face etched with a guilt he couldn't shake. Judge Margaret Ellison, 60, entered with a sweep of her black robe, her expression stern but fair, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. She banged the gavel, silencing the room. "This court is now in session," she declared, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "We are here to examine the events of April 23, 2025, resulting in the death of Marcus Harper. Let's proceed with respect for the truth." Evelyn sat at the plaintiff's table beside Lila Monroe, 45, her JAG Corps attorney, whose sharp eyes scanned the room like a hawk. Lila leaned close, her voice a whisper. "They're going to paint Marcus as a threat. Stay calm, Evie. We've got the footage, the reports, the witnesses. Let them dig their own grave." Evelyn nodded, her face unreadable, but her eyes burned with a fire that hadn't dimmed since that night on Clarendon Boulevard. She wasn't here to win sympathy, she was here to wield the truth like a weapon. Holt rose, his voice smooth, practiced, as he addressed the jury, a mix of Arlington locals, their faces a blend of skepticism and curiosity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, "this is a tragic case, but not a criminal one." Officer Derek Vance acted in the heat of the moment, believing his life was in danger. Marcus Harper, God rest his soul, made a sudden movement, reaching for an object that could have been a weapon. My client followed protocol, protecting himself and his partner. This isn't about race or malice, it's about split-second decisions in a dangerous world. The jury shifted, some nodding, others frowning. Holt gestured toward Vance, who sat straighter, his jaw tight, playing the part of a dutiful officer. You'll hear about Officer Vance's impeccable record, Holt continued. His years of service, his bravery under pressure. And you'll hear about a technical glitch that obscured the body cam footage. Unfortunate, but not suspicious. The evidence will show that this was a lawful act, however heartbreaking. Evelyn's fingers tightened on her folder, but her face remained a mask of calm. Lila stood, her heels clicking as she approached the jury, her voice steady but laced with steel. What Mr. Holt calls a glitch is a lie, she said, her words landing like a gavel. What he calls a split-second decision is a choice rooted in bias. Marcus Harper was a husband, a father, a little league coach, not a threat. He reached for his wallet, not a weapon, and Officer Vance shot him dead in front of his wife. We will show you footage, reports, and testimony that expose a pattern of misconduct, a system that shields the guilty, and a truth that cannot be buried. The jury leaned forward, their attention locked on Lila. Evelyn's gaze shifted to Vance, who avoided her eyes, his fingers tapping nervously on the table. Caleb in the gallery stared at his hands, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. Judge Ellison nodded, her voice sharp. Counselor, call your first witness. Lila called Evelyn to the stand, and the room stilled as she rose, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding. She swore the oath, her voice clear, unwavering, and sat, her hands folded, her eyes scanning the jury. Lila approached, her tone professional but warm. Mrs. Harper, please tell us about the night of April 23rd. Evelyn's voice was low, steady, each word chosen with precision. Marcus and I were driving home from our son Jamal's saxophone recital. It was a good night, our boy played like a pro, and we were laughing, planning to celebrate at home. Then the lights camered and blew like a warning we'd seen too many times. Marcus pulled over, careful, calm, like always. Officer Vance approached, his hand on his gun, his voice sharp, mocking. He asked for Marcus's license, but when Marcus reached for his wallet lowly, hands visible, Vance shouted, drew his gun, and fired. One shot. Marcus didn't have a chance. The jury's faces tightened, some leaning forward, others glancing at Vance, who stared at the table, his jaw clenched. Lila paced slowly, her voice rising. Did your husband make any threatening moves, Mrs. Harper? Evelyn's eyes didn't waver. None. He was complying, just like he always did. Vance saw a black man in a nice car and decided that was threat enough. Holt shot to his feet. Objection. Speculation. Judge Ellison raised an eyebrow. Sustained. Mrs. Harper, stick to the facts. Evelyn nodded, her voice steady. The fact is, my husband was unarmed, cooperative, and murdered in front of me. The fact is, Officer Vance didn't hesitate, didn't warn, didn't assess. He shot and he lied. The courtroom buzzed, jurors whispering, reporters scribbling. Holt's face reddened, but Lila pressed on, her voice calm but relentless. Mrs. Harper, you have a military background, correct? Evelyn nodded, her posture straightening. Yes. I served Inspector 7, a Delta Force unit, for 8 years. Classified operations in Syria, Yemen, Colombia. The room gasped, jurors exchanging glances, Vance's eyes widening. Lila handed her a document marked Exhibit A. Please identify this. Evelyn held it up, her voice clear. A Department of Defense letter confirming my service, Inspector 7, redacted for security. Lila turned to the jury. Mrs. Harper isn't just a widow, she's a decorated soldier who knows real danger. If she says Marcus wasn't a threat, you can trust her judgment. Holt objected again, his voice sharp. This is irrelevant. Her military record doesn't change the facts of the stop. Ellison overruled him, her eyes narrowing. It establishes credibility, counselor. Sit down. Lila continued, her voice rising. Mrs. Harper, what did you do after the shooting? Evelyn's gaze swept the room, landing briefly on Vance, who flinched. I held my husband as he bled out. I told him to stay with me, but he couldn't. I went to the precinct, answered their questions, and started looking for the truth. I found footage, civilian and traffic cams, that shows exactly what happened. Vance lied. My husband died for nothing. Lila played the coffee shop footage on a courtroom screen, the grainy images stark and undeniable. The Audi pulling over, Vance's aggressive stance, Marcus's careful reach, the flash of the shot. The jury gasped, some covering their mouths, others glaring at Vance. Caleb in the gallery buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Lila paused the video on Evelyn cradling Marcus, her face a mask of fury and grief. "This is no glitch," she said, her voice ringing. "This is the truth." Holt cross-examined, his tone dripping with condescension. "Mrs. Harper, you're a soldier, trained to stay calm under pressure. Couldn't you have misread the situation? Maybe your husband did move suddenly." Evelyn leaned forward, her voice low-cutting. "I've faced mortar fire, ambushes, men with real weapons. I know what a threat looks like. Marcus wasn't one. You want to talk sudden?" Vance drew and fired in under 2 seconds. "That's not training, that's panic." Holt smirked, undeterred. "You're angry, Mrs. Harper." "Understandable. But anger clouds judgment. Maybe you're projecting your grief onto my client." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her voice a blade. "I'm not projecting. I'm remembering. And I remember a man who thought a badge gave him the right to play God." The jury shifted, their faces a mix of shock and anger. Holt faltered, his questions trailing off as Evelyn's words hung in the air. Lila called her next witness, Tina Reyes, 39, the coffee shop manager, who testified nervously about providing the footage, her voice trembling but resolute. "I saw the news, saw Mrs. Harper's face," she said. "I couldn't stay silent." Holt tried to discredit her, suggesting she'd tampered with the video, but Tina held firm, her eyes meeting Evelyn's with a nod of solidarity. Next, Lila called Caleb Ruiz, who took the stand with visible reluctance, his hands trembling as he swore the oath. Lila's voice was gentle but firm. "Officer Ruiz, you were there that night. What did you see?" Caleb swallowed, his eyes darting to Vance, then to Evelyn. "It happened fast," he said, his voice barely audible. "Marcus Mr. Harper was reaching for his wallet. I told Derek to wait, but he shot." The courtroom erupted, spectators gasping, reporters typing furiously. Judge Ellison banged her gavel, demanding order. Lila pressed, her voice sharp. "Did you see any threat, Officer Ruiz?" Caleb shook his head, his voice breaking. "No." He was complying. "I should have stopped it." Vance's face drained of color, his hands gripping the table. Holt objected, shouting about hearsay, but Ellison overruled, her eyes locked on Caleb. "Continue," she said. Caleb's voice grew stronger, his guilt spilling out. "Derek's done this before, pushed people, bent the rules. I kept quiet because I thought it was my job. But it wasn't. I failed Mr. Harper." Evelyn's gaze softened for a moment, not with forgiveness but with recognition. Caleb wasn't her ally, but his truth was a crack in the system's armor. Lila introduced more evidence. 3 prior complaints against Vance for excessive force, all dismissed. A dash cam clip from another incident showing Vance accepting a bribe, internal emails hinting at his uncle, a county commissioner, pulling strings to protect him. The jury's faces hardened, their trust in Vance eroding with each exhibit. Lila's closing was surgical. "This isn't about one bad decision. It's about a man who abused his power, a system that enabled him, and a family destroyed by lies. You have the power to hold them accountable." Holt's defense was a desperate scramble, painting Vance as a hero under pressure, Marcus as an unfortunate casualty, and Evelyn as a vengeful soldier twisting facts to fit her narrative. But the jury's eyes were on Evelyn, on the footage, on Caleb's trembling confession. Vance took the stand, his voice defiant but shaky, claiming he'd feared for his life, that Marcus's sudden move justified the shot. Lila's cross-examination was merciless, replaying the footage frame by frame, forcing Vance to admit he'd seen no weapon, only a wallet. Evelyn's final testimony was a masterstroke. She stood, removing her blazer to reveal a faded Spectre 7 tattoo on her forearm, a jagged scar running beside it. "I've seen death," she said, her voice resonating in the silent courtroom. "I've carried men through gunfire, buried teammates, survived wounds that should have killed me. I know fear, and I know courage. Derek Vance wasn't afraid, was reckless. He didn't see a threat. He saw a black man who dared to exist in a nice car. I'm not here for pity. I'm here because my husband deserved to live, and this system let him die." She held up a photo of Marcus coaching Jamal's little league team, his smile bright, his hands steady. "This is who you took," she said, her voice breaking for the first time, not with weakness but with a grief so raw it silenced the room. "This is who you failed." She sat, her eyes locked on the jury, her silence louder than any argument. The trial adjourned for deliberation, but the courtroom lingered in stunned silence, the weight of Evelyn's words settling like dust after an explosion. Outside, the crowd roared, their signs now joined by murals painted on nearby walls, a warrior woman with Evelyn's face, holding a torch. Vance left in cuffs, his trial for misconduct pending, his career in ruins. Caleb lingered, his badge heavy, his confession a step toward redemption he didn't yet deserve. Evelyn stood on the courthouse steps, the media swarming, but she said nothing, her silence a shield and a sword. The hashtag Soul Justice surged, fueled by the footage, the testimony, the truth she'd forced into the light. She wasn't done, not yet. The system was cracked, but it wasn't broken. That would come next. The October wind swept through Arlington, Virginia, carrying the faint rustle of fallen leaves, and the weight of a city changed forever. The Arlington County Courthouse, once a stoic backdrop to routine hearings, had become a battleground, its steps scarred by the footprints of protesters, its walls echoing with the chants of justice for Marcus. On the evening after the trial, Evelyn Harper, 38, stood alone on the courthouse roof, her navy blazer unbuttoned, her buzz-cut scalp catching the last rays of a setting sun. Below, the media frenzy had dissipated, their vans retreating like scavengers after a feast, but the streets still hummed with purpose signs left propped against lampposts, murals of a warrior woman with Evelyn's face blooming on brick walls, hashtags like Soul Justice, Inspector General trending across the nation. Evelyn held a folded American flag, its edges frayed from Marcus's funeral, her fingers tracing the stars as if they could map a path forward. The trial had ended with Officer Derek Vance, 34, stripped of his badge, facing criminal charges for manslaughter and misconduct, his once cocky swagger replaced by a hollow stare as he was led away in cuffs. Officer Caleb Ruiz, 29, had resigned, his televised confession a raw, halting admission of complicity that didn't absolve him but cracked the precinct's armor. The jury's verdict guilty on counts of excessive force and falsifying report had been a victory, but Evelyn felt no triumph. Justice wasn't a trophy, it was a wound, raw and bleeding, a reminder of what she'd lost and what she'd ignited. She looked out over Arlington's skyline, its orderly rows of brick houses and tree-lined streets now marked by an awakening. The city hadn't just watched her fight, it had joined her, its pulse quickened by the truth she'd forced into the light. She tucked the flag under her arm, her boots steady on the gravel roof, and descended the stairs, her shadow stretching long and sharp, a fault line in a world she'd reshaped. The next morning, Evelyn woke in her colonial home on Oak Street, the silence heavier than ever. Jamal, 14, was back from his aunt's, his saxophone case untouched in the corner, his eyes carrying a grief too big for his lanky frame. She found him at the kitchen table, staring at a bowl of cereal gone soggy, his phone open to a news article with her face on it. "They're calling you a hero," he said, his voice low, almost accusatory. "Doesn't feel like it, does it?" Evelyn sat across from him, her hands folded, her voice soft but steady. "No, it doesn't," she said. "Heroes get to bring people home. I couldn't bring your dad back." Jamal's jaw tightened, his fingers gripping the spoon. "Then why'd you do it? All those cameras, all that fighting for what?" Evelyn reached for his hand, but he pulled back, his eyes searching hers for an answer she wasn't sure she had. "For you," she said finally, her voice cracking for the first time in months. "So you grow up in a world where the truth matters, where men like Vance can't hide behind a badge. For your dad, so his name isn't just a headline but a reason things change." Jamal didn't respond, his gaze dropping to the table, but his shoulders softened, a small surrender to the weight they both carried. Evelyn stood, kissing the top of his head, her lips lingering as if she could shield him from the world she'd exposed. She left him with a promise to be back for dinner and drove to the precinct, her husband's old pickup truck rattling over Arlington's smooth streets. The new police chief, Captain Lauren Gwynn, 43, had called for a meeting, her voice on the phone clipped but respectful. The precinct lobby was quieter than before, officers avoiding Evelyn's gaze as she entered, her presence a reminder of their failure. Gwynn met her in a conference room, her uniform crisp, her face lined with the exhaustion of a woman navigating a storm. "Mrs. Harper," Gwynn began, her voice steady but cautious, "I owe you an apology. Not just for what happened to your husband, but for the system that let it happen. I'm here to rebuild trust, but I need your help." Evelyn's eyes narrowed, her posture unyielding. "You don't need my help," she said, her voice low-cutting. "You need to do your job, fire the liars, train the weak, listen to the people who've been screaming for years. I'm not your PR stunt." Gwen's face tightened, but she nodded, her hands clasped on the table. "Fair enough," she said. "But I've read your file, Spectre, 7-8 years in the field. You know systems, how they break, how they're fixed. I'm asking for insight, not a photo op." Evelyn leaned back, her gaze piercing. "Then start with transparency," she said. Release every body cam from the last 5 years. Let the public see what you're hiding. Gwen hesitated, then nodded. I'll push for it. But it'll take time. Time's a luxury Marcus didn't have, Evelyn said, standing, her voice final. She left the room, her boots echoing in the hall, leaving Gwen staring at the empty chair, her resolve shaken but not broken. Underscore 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 underscore. Outside, Arlington was alive with change. Community groups had adopted Evelyn's Red Dot Index, a grassroots map of officer-involved incidents, now displayed on posters in coffee shops and libraries. A local artist, Javier Morales, 27, painted a mural on the side of a community center, depicting Evelyn as a soldier with a torch, Marcus's face in the flame, their son Jamal playing his saxophone in the background. The mural drew crowds, their phones capturing the image, their voices a mix of awe and anger. She's the Spectre General, a teenager said, her voice fierce. She didn't just win, she woke us up. Evelyn avoided the spotlight, declining interviews, ignoring the reporters camped outside her house. But her silence amplified her impact, her absence a canvas for others to project their hopes and fears. She spent her days meeting quietly with families who'd lost loved ones to police violence, their stories a mirror of her own. In a church basement, she sat with Marissa Coleman, 52, whose son had been killed during a traffic stop 2 years earlier. They called it a mistake, Marissa said, her voice trembling. But it wasn't. It was murder, like your Marcus. Evelyn listened, her hand steady, her eyes meeting Marissa's. We're building something, she said, her voice low, resolute. A network, a record, a way to make sure they can't hide anymore. Marissa nodded, her tears falling, her hand gripping Evelyn's. You're not alone, Evelyn added, her voice soft but fierce. Not anymore. She worked with Lila Monroe, her JAG Corps attorney, to establish the Marcus Harper Justice Fund, a nonprofit to support legal battles against police misconduct. Lila, 45, ran the logistics, her office a chaos of files and coffee cups, while Evelyn focused on strategy, her military training shaping their approach. We're not just suing, Evelyn told Lila, her voice firm. We're exposing, connecting, forcing accountability. Every case is a brick in a wall they can't tear down. Underscore 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 underscore. In November, Evelyn was summoned to Capitol Hill, invited by Senator Alicia Grant, 57, a progressive Democrat pushing for police reform. The hearing room was packed, cameras flashing, aides whispering, the air thick with political posturing. Evelyn entered in her Spectre 7 uniform, its olive drab faded but its insignia sharp, her scars visible beneath rolled-up sleeves. She unrolled a map on the table, marked with 27 red dots, officer-involved shootings across the U.S., each a life erased by procedure. Ladies and gentlemen, she began, her voice resonating in the hushed room, this isn't a request for reform. It's a warning. These dots are people's sons, daughters, fathers, like my husband, Marcus Harper. You've heard their names, seen their faces, but you've done nothing. I'm not here to beg. I'm here to tell you, the truth is coming and it won't wait for your permission. She held up her scarred palm, shrapnel marks glinting under the lights. I've fought wars you'll never see. Carried men through fire, buried friends because systems failed. This system, your system failed, Marcus, and it's failing every name on this map. You can act, or you can answer to the people who won't stay silent anymore. She sat, her eyes locked on the senators, her silence a challenge they couldn't ignore. Grant's voice trembled as she thanked Evelyn, her gavel banging to quiet the room's murmurs. The hearing sparked a firestorm, clips of Evelyn's testimony flooding X, her map shared millions of times. The Department of Justice announced reviews of 3 precincts, citing credible concerns raised by her testimony. Pundits called her the Widow General, a title she neither accepted nor rejected. She didn't care for labels, she cared for results. Underscore 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 underscore. Back in Arlington, the precinct was under siege, not by violence but by scrutiny. Gwen released redacted body cam footage, a first step that drew protests in praise in equal measure. A local news anchor, Rachel Kim, 36, aired a segment on the Red Dot Index, interviewing families who joined Evelyn's network. This isn't just one woman's fight, Kim said, her voice steady. It's a movement born in blood, built on truth. Vance's trial dragged on, his uncle's influence waning, his legal team shrinking as public pressure mounted. Caleb Ruiz, now a civilian, spoke at a community forum, his voice raw, his hands shaking. "I was part of the problem," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Mrs. Harper showed me what courage looks like. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'm trying to make it right." The audience was silent, their judgment heavy, but a few nodded, recognizing the cost of his honesty. Evelyn watched the forum on her laptop, her face unreadable. She didn't think Caleb didn't absolve him. His truth was a step, not a salvation. She focused on the next fight, meeting with tech activists to digitize the Red Dot Index, creating an app that let users report incidents in real time. "This is our weapon," she told the group, her voice firm. "Not guns, not rage, information. They can't silence what everyone sees." Underscore 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 underscore. By December, Evelyn's life was a paradox. She was everywhere and nowhere, a symbol of justice who shunned the spotlight. She visited Marcus's grave at Arlington National Cemetery, the frost crunching under her boots, a single coin a soldier's tribute placed on his headstone. "We're not done, love," she whispered, her breath visible in the cold air. "Not until it's right." A girl, no older than 10, approached, her mother trailing behind. "Are you the lady from TV?" the girl asked, her eyes wide. Evelyn crouched, her smile soft but weary. "I'm just Evie," she said, brushing a braid from the girl's face. "Who are you?" The girl beamed. "I'm Maya. My dad says you're making the world better." Evelyn's chest tightened, but her voice was steady. "Your dad's a smart man," she said. "Keep him honest, okay?" Maya nodded, clutching her mother's hand as they walked away, leaving Evelyn alone with the graves and the ghosts. She vanished from public view after that, her whereabouts a mystery that fueled speculation. Some said she joined a national task force on police reform, others that she was training activists in secret. The truth was simpler. She was with Jamal, coaching him through his first saxophone solo since Marcus's death, sitting in their backyard under the stars, listening to his halting notes. "You sound like him," she said, her voice soft, her eyes glistening. Jamal smiled, a rare crack in his grief, and played on. Across the country, Evelyn's legacy grew, a quiet revolution born in Arlington streets. In Memphis, a veteran held her testimony aloft, rallying a crowd to demand body cam transparency. In Chicago, a high schooler cited her in a mock trial, declaring, "I want to be like the woman who made them stop lying." In Arlington, the community center mural became a pilgrimage site, flowers and candles left at its base, notes scrawled with "Thank you, Evie." The Red Dot Index app hit 1 million downloads, its data forcing precincts to confront their records. Evelyn didn't see most of it. She was in a small town in Ohio, meeting a family whose son had died in a no-knock raid, her notebook open, her questions sharp. She was in a diner in Georgia, sketching strategies with a lawyer fighting for a wrongly convicted man. She was everywhere the truth was needed, her silence louder than any speech, her scars a map of a war she'd never stop fighting. Arlington changed slowly, imperfectly. Gwynn implemented training reforms, firing 2 officers for falsifying reports. The precinct's walls, once a fortress, now bore plaques listing fallen civilians, Marcus's name first. Jamal returned to school, his saxophone case slung over his shoulder, his father's smile in his eyes. Evelyn watched from the sidelines, her heart heavy but unbroken, her mission clear. She stood one last time on the courthouse roof, the city below a tapestry of light and shadow. She unfolded Marcus's flag, letting the wind catch it, her fingers steady. "We're building it, love," she whispered. "A world where truth wins." She turned, her boots crunching on gravel, her shadow a promise that the fight wasn't over, not now, not ever. All right, folks, we've just walked through the fire with Evelyn Harper, a woman who turned her grief into a sledgehammer and cracked open a system that thought it was untouchable. If justice on Main Street hit you like a freight train, and let's be honest, it should bites, because Evelyn's story isn't just hers. It's a mirror held up to our world where truth sometimes has to fight tooth and nail to see daylight. But here's the kicker. This isn't just a story set in 2025 Arlington, Virginia. It's happening now in your city, your neighborhood, maybe even your ex-feed. Scroll through your phone and you'll see ethish tags like "Justice for Someone," videos of protests, families demanding answers. Sound familiar? Yeah, I thought so. Let's get real for a second. Evelyn's fight reminds us that systems, whether it's a police precinct, a corporate boardroom, Or even your local HO love to hide behind procedure, like it's a bulletproof vest. But here's the lesson, served with a side of sass. Truth doesn't care about your paperwork. It's messy, it's loud, and it'll knock on your door at 3 a.m. with a lawyer and a USB drive full of receipts. Evelyn didn't win because she was louder than everyone else. She won because she was smarter, quieter, and more stubborn than the lies stacked against her. So next time you see someone shrug and say, "That's just how it is," channel your inner Evelyn and ask, says who? Because, let's face it, how it is usually means how they want to keep it. Now, I'm not saying you need to storm a courthouse or start a hashtag revolution though, props if you do. But take a page from Evelyn's playbook. Use your voice, your vote, your phone, your coffee shop conversations. Call out the nonsense when you see it, whether it's a shady cop, a corrupt boss, or that guy cutting you off in traffic with a baby on board sticker going 90 in a 35 zone. Okay, maybe not that last one, but you get the point. Small action: reporting an incident, sharing a story, listening to someone who's been ignored add up. They're the red dots on Evelyn's map, and they're how change starts. Speaking of today, let's talk 2025 vibes. We're living in a world where X posts can spark movements, where a single video can topple a career, and where AI like me is out here trying to keep up with your questions while dodging server crashes. But seriously, the tools Evelyn used: civilian footage, public pressure, data are tools you've got right now. That phone in your hand? It's a weapon if you use it right. Record the truth, share the truth, demand the truth. And maybe, just maybe, don't let your algorithm feed you nothing but cat videos and conspiracy threats. Balance it out with some real-world impact, you know? Here's the educational bit, wrapped in a chuckle. Justice isn't a Netflix special you binge and forget. It's a muscle you've got to flex, even when it's hard, even when it's awkward, even when you're just one voice in a sea of noise. Evelyn didn't have superpowers, she had scars, grit, and a refusal to let silence win. So laugh at the absurdity of a system that thinks a glitch can bury a life, but don't let it slide. Call it out, because if Evelyn can stare down a courtroom full of suits, you can handle a tough conversation at the family barbecue. Now let's get interactive. What's your red dot? Is there a moment in your life, your community, where you saw something wrong and thought, "This can't stand"? Maybe it's a local issue, a workplace injustice, or just that one neighbor who keeps stealing your parking spot. Kidding, but only a little. Drop it in the comments. Let's start a map of our own. How would you channel Evelyn's fire to make a difference where you are? And no pressure, but if you're sitting there thinking, "I don't know where to start," ask yourself, what's one small step you could take today to make your world a little more just? Oh, and one last thing, didn't ghost us. If you vibed with Evelyn's story, hit that subscribe button on the channel. We've got more tales of grit, truth, and the kind of people who make systems sweat coming your way. Join the crew, and let's keep the fire burning for stories that matter. Who knows? The next one might inspire your red dot moment.